The villagers murmured in agreement. Some turned away, others stared in disgust. Two men stepped forward and grabbed her by the arms. She screamed, but no one listened. Her cries echoed as she was dragged away. Madhu looked up at Lami. "Will you forgive me?" Lami turned from the crowd, the words of her father still hanging in the air like dust after a storm. She had long imagined this moment, the day he would realize the truth, fall to his knees and ask for her forgiveness. But now that it had come, there was no joy in her heart, no sense of triumph, only a quiet understanding. "You let her hurt me," she said softly, her voice not angry, just tired. "You never stood up for me." Madhu bowed his head, unable to meet her eyes. "I was weak," he admitted, "and I may never forgive myself. But if you can, please, let me make this right." Lami breathed deeply. She had carried anger like a weight for so long, but now, standing on the other side of that pain, she felt something stronger than revenge. Peace. "I forgive you," she said, "but I will not live in this house again." Madhu nodded slowly. He understood. As Lami walked away from him, the villagers watched in silence. Their eyes followed her like the path of the morning sun. She had returned from the edge of death. She had stood before the very people who once turned their backs and revealed the truth. She had not broken. She had become whole. At the edge of the village, Lami stopped and looked out at the rising sun. The sky was painted in soft gold and pink, and the air smelled of new beginnings. This was not just the start of another day. It was the start of a new life. With Mama Nuru's guidance, Lami began a new chapter. She set up a small healing hut just outside Kambe, nestled beneath the branches of a sacred tree. The walls were made of red clay, the roof of woven palm. Inside, shelves held jars of dried herbs, roots and medicines made from the forest's wisdom. At first, only a few villagers came. Some still remembered her as the girl from before, unsure if they could trust her. But slowly, word spread of her skill, of her kindness, of her strength. "She is not just a healer," one old woman whispered. "She is a warrior." And soon they came. People from distant places, carrying their sick children, their wounded hopes, their broken spirits. They brought baskets of cassava, dried fish, goats, fruits, anything they could offer. Not for payment, but in gratitude. Children came too. They sat outside her hut, listening to her stories of courage. How she survived in the forest, how she turned fear into strength. For the first time in her life, Lami felt what she had always longed for: home. One evening, as the sky turned the color of ripe mangoes, Lami sat grinding herbs. Footsteps approached softly from behind. She turned and saw Ara. The girl was no longer the pampered daughter who watched Lami suffer. Her fine clothes were gone. Her face was thinner, her voice quieter. "I'm sorry," Ara whispered. Lami studied her. In her eyes, she saw true regret, and something more, a desire to change. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Ara said, her voice shaking, "but I want to learn. I want to help people like you do." Lami remembered herself at that age, hungry for love, desperate for kindness. She would not become like Doya, filled with bitterness. She reached for another bowl of herbs and placed it in front of Ara. "Then sit," she said, "and learn." A tear slipped down Ara's cheek. She sat beside Lami, and a new story began, not just for them, but for the whole village. Now, when Lami walked through Kambe, women greeted her with warmth. Elders nodded in respect. Children followed her, asking questions and begging for stories. She was no longer the abandoned girl. She was a guide, a protector, a living tale of strength. Little girls watched her closely. They memorized how she mixed herbs, how she held her staff, how she spoke with steady courage. They whispered to each other, "I want to be like Lami when I grow up." Lami smiled at them. She saw herself in their eyes, not the weak girl tied to a tree, but the brave soul she had become, and she wanted something better for them. She wanted them to know their worth from the start, to grow up fearless. One hot afternoon, a woman came to Lami's hut holding her daughter's hand. The girl was small, maybe 10 years old, clinging tightly to her mother's dress. "My husband," the woman began, her voice shaking. "He beats her." I had nowhere else to go. Lami knelt before the child. She gently took her hands. "You are safe now," she said. Tears welled up in the mother's eyes. "But if he comes looking—" Lami stood, her gaze like stone. "Then he will have to face me." The story spread like wildfire. Lami was not just a healer. She was a protector, a safe place, a warrior for those with no voice. Women and children came to her with their pain, and she welcomed them all. She taught them. She gave them strength. Years passed. The village changed. Girls grew up strong. Boys grew up to respect them. The whispers of cruelty faded, replaced by songs of honor. Lami's name became legend. The girl who had been left to die had become the heart of Kambe. One night, as stars scattered like salt across the sky, Mama Nuru came to visit. She sat beside Lami outside the hut, watching the fire crackle. "You have done well, child," she said. Lami looked at her, heart full. "I only wanted to make sure no one ever feels as alone as I once did." Mama Nuru nodded. "And because of you, they never will." Time moved forward. Lami's name traveled beyond the hills, beyond the rivers. People from other lands came to see the woman who had turned pain into power, who had taken suffering and made it sacred. One afternoon, as Lami walked through the market, she saw an old woman sitting in the dirt. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled. She reached out her hand, begging for food. People walked past her like wind around a stone. Lami paused. Something in the woman's shape stirred her memory. The woman lifted her face. It was Doya. Her face, once proud, was now gaunt. Her voice cracked. Like dry leaves, she crawled forward and grabbed the hem of Lami's robe. "Lami, my child, please, forgive me, help me, I have nothing left." The market fell silent. Everyone watched. Would she spit on her? Shout at her? Turn away? Lami looked down, but she felt nothing, no rage, no sorrow, no need for revenge, just silence. She gently pulled her robe from Doya's grasp. She stepped around her without a word and walked on. The crowd stared, and someone whispered she didn't need revenge. Lami turned from the crowd, the words of her father still hanging in the air like dust after a storm. She had long imagined this moment, the day he would realize the truth, fall to his knees, and ask for her forgiveness. But now that it had come, there was no joy in her heart, no sense of triumph, only a quiet understanding. "You let her hurt me," she said softly, her voice not angry, just tired. "You never stood up for me." Madhu bowed his head, unable to meet her eyes. "I was weak," he admitted, "and I may never forgive myself. But if you can, please, let me make this right." Lami breathed deeply. She had carried anger like a weight for so long. But now, standing on the other side of that pain, she felt something stronger than revenge. "Peace, I forgive you," she said. "But I will not live in this house again." Madhu nodded slowly. He understood. As Lami walked away from him, the villagers watched in silence. Their eyes followed her like the path of the morning sun. She had returned from the edge of death. She had stood before the very people who once turned their backs and revealed the truth. She had not broken. She had become whole. At the edge of the village, Lami stopped and looked out at the rising sun. The sky was painted in soft gold and pink, and the air smelled of new beginnings. This was not just the start of another day. It was the start of a new life. With Mama Nuru's guidance, Lami began a new chapter. She set up a small healing hut just outside Kambe, nestled beneath the branches of a sacred tree. The walls were made of red clay, the roof of woven palm. Inside, shelves held jars of dried herbs, roots and medicines made from the forest's wisdom. At first, only a few villagers came. Some still remembered her as the girl from before, unsure if they could trust her. But slowly, word spread of her skill, of her kindness, of her strength. "She is not just a healer," one old woman whispered. "She is a warrior." And soon they came. People from distant places, carrying their sick children, their wounded hopes, their broken spirits. They brought baskets of cassava, dried fish, goats, fruits, anything they could offer, not for payment, but in gratitude. Children came too. They sat outside her hut, listening to her stories of courage, how she survived in the forest, how she turned fear into strength. For the first time in her life, Lami felt what she had always longed for: home. When Zara returned, the unexpected happened. Madame Ifeoma was standing by the door, her arms crossed, a look of disappointment on her face. "Where were you?" Madame Ifeoma asked, her voice calm but filled with regret. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Toriro, hoping she would explain, but Toriro stood there, her arms folded, smiling smugly as though this was all part of her plan. I went to buy lunch for Toriro," Zara explained quietly, her voice shaking. She felt the sting of guilt rising in her chest. Madame Ifeoma frowned, her disappointment clear. "Don't ever leave the office without telling me again," she said sharply. Her voice was cold, and Zara's face turned red with shame. "I'm sorry, Ma," Zara whispered, hoping Madame Ifeoma would understand that she hadn't meant to break the rule. Toriro, however, was secretly pleased. Her plan was unfolding perfectly. She had set the trap, and now Zara was falling right into it. The next disaster struck when money went missing from the office. It seemed like a normal day at first, but then Madame Ifeoma discovered that a large sum of 16 million naira, which had been deposited into her account for a major contract, had disappeared. "Who had access to my files?" Madame Ifeoma demanded, her voice trembling with fury. Toriro, watching from the side, saw an opportunity she couldn't pass up. With a sly grin, she turned to Chika, who was observing from a distance. "Watch how I handle this," Toriro whispered, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Without wasting a second, Toriro pointed directly at Zara. "She was the last one with the documents," she announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Madam Me." Ifeoma turned to Zara, her gaze sharp and filled with suspicion. "Did you take my money?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. Zara's heart raced. She couldn't believe what was happening. "No, Ma," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I would never—" Her hands shook uncontrollably. Madame Ifeoma's face remained emotionless. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at Zara. "Get out!" she commanded, her voice full of anger. Zara stood frozen, the ground beneath her feet seemingly vanishing. She wanted to explain, to tell Madame Ifeoma that she was innocent, but the words wouldn't come. The office felt suffocating, as though the walls were closing in around her. Toriro stood off to the side, a smug smile spreading across her face. This was her moment. Zara had no idea what was coming, but Toriro did, and she was determined to make sure that Zara wouldn't last another day in the office. Zara's voice cracked as she pleaded, "I didn't steal anything, I swear on my life." But Madame Ifeoma's face was like stone, unmoved, cold. Toriro stood back, folding her arms, watching the scene unfold with a twisted sense of satisfaction, as if it were some thrilling drama playing out before her. Madame Ifeoma's voice cut through the air, firm and final. "Leave, now, or I'll call security." Zara's heart shattered. How had things turned out this way? Just yesterday, she had a job, a glimmer of hope for a better future. Now she was being tossed out like garbage. Her eyes scanned the room. The other workers stood still, silent, eyes averted. None of them wanted to challenge Madame Ifeoma, and no one would dare defend the girl accused of stealing millions. Slowly, Zara stood, wiping away the tears that kept falling. She turned towards Toriro. The smile on Toriro's face made it clear. This was all part of her plan. It was all a setup. Without saying another word, Zara walked out of the office, her heart heavy, tears streaming down her face. She had nowhere to go. Night fell, and the streets of Abuja felt colder and more unforgiving than ever. Zara wandered aimlessly, exhausted and hungry, the world around her seeming vast and indifferent. She finally found a small space between two market stalls. The ground was rough and cold, but she had no choice. She curled up in a corner, hugging her knees to her chest, and tried to sleep, though the hunger gnawed at her stomach and the emptiness of the day gnawed at her soul. Meanwhile, back at the office, Toriro and Chika shared a victorious laugh, high-fiving each other in celebration. "Finally, she's gone," Chika chuckled. Toriro smiled, savoring the moment. "Let her beg on the streets where she belongs. Let's see how she survives." But what they didn't know was that fate had other plans. 2 weeks passed, and life at the office moved on as if Zara had never existed. Toriro strutted around the office like a queen, enjoying her newfound position and the power she had over the office. Then, one afternoon, Madame Ifeoma's phone rang. "Hello, madam," said the voice on the other end. "We have an update about the missing money." Madame Ifeoma sat up straight. "Yes, what is it?" The next words out of the banker's mouth made her blood run cold. "Madam, your account was hacked. The money was stolen by an outsider. It had nothing to do with your staff." Madame Ifeoma froze. "Are you telling me Zara was innocent?" "Yes, madam. The real thief has been caught. Your money will be returned soon." Madame Ifeoma dropped the phone, her hand shaking. She had thrown an innocent girl out onto the streets, humiliated her without a second thought. How could she have been so blind? How could she have believed such a terrible lie? Despair washed over her as she looked around the office. "Where is Zara now?" she whispered. Nobody had an answer. She had to find her before it was too late. Madame Ifeoma's car slowed as it passed through the bustling market. Her heart was heavy, the weight of guilt bearing down on her. Then she saw her. Zara sat on the ground near a small stall, her clothes covered in dust, her face dull with the weight of despair. She looked nothing like the hopeful, bright young woman who had once walked into her office full of promise. Madame Ifeoma stepped out of the car, her feet heavy, as she walked toward Zara. "Zara," she called softly. Zara's head snapped up, her eyes widened in shock. "Ma?" Madame Ifeoma sat beside her on the ground. People stared, but she didn't care. "I was wrong," she said, her voice soft and filled with regret. "I should have trusted you." Zara's lips trembled, her eyes filled with tears. "It's okay, Ma," she whispered. Madame Ifeoma reached for her hand. "Come back, not as my assistant," she paused, "but as my business partner." Zara's eyes flew open in shock. "What?" Madame Ifeoma smiled gently. "You're smart, hard-working and honest. I need someone like you." Zara's hands shook as she covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "Ma, I don't know what to say." Madame Ifeoma squeezed her hand. "Just say yes." For a moment, Zara couldn't breathe, her heart racing in disbelief. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Yes." Meanwhile, Toriro sat back in her office chair, a smug smile on her face. Life was good. Zara was gone. Madame Ifeoma had trusted her, and now the office was in her hands. Toriro stretched back, feeling victorious. "I told you, Chika," she said into the phone, "when you handle things well, no one suspects you." Chika laughed on the other end of the line. "You're amazing, babe. Enjoy your victory." Just then, the door to the office slammed open. Madame Ifeoma entered, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Toriro jumped to her feet. "Good morning, Ma." Madame Ifeoma didn't smile. "Toriro, Pack your things. You're fired." Toriro's eyes widened in disbelief. "Ma," she stammered, forcing a nervous laugh. "This must be a joke." Madame Ifeoma folded her arms, her gaze cold. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Toriro's smile faded. "Ma, I don't understand." Madame Ifeoma's eyes turned icy. "You tried to destroy an innocent person. I can't work with someone like you." Toriro's knees trembled. "Please, Ma, I was only trying to help." Madame Ifeoma raised a hand. "Security." 2 security guards stepped forward. Toriro grabbed the desk, her voice frantic. "No, please, Ma, I have nowhere to go." Madame Ifeoma turned her back. "Take her out." The security guards grabbed Toriro's arms and pulled her out of the office. Her desperate screams echoed through the hallways, but it was too late. Toriro was gone. Months passed, and Zara was no longer the same girl who had slept in a half-built building. She was no longer the one who had been humiliated, tricked, and cast aside. Today, she walked into the office wearing a sharp suit, her head held high. Every worker turned to look at her, whispers filling the room. "Is that Zara?" The same girl. "They kicked out," one person whispered. "She looks like a real boss now," another replied. Zara reached Madame Ifeoma's office and knocked softly. "Come in," Madame Ifeoma's voice called. Zara entered, her heart pounding. Madame Ifeoma smiled and gestured for her to sit. "Are you ready?" Zara took a deep breath. "Yes, Ma." Madame Ifeoma handed her a file. "Good, because today you'll sign as co-owner of this company." Zara's hand shook as she took the pen, her eyes filled with tears. "Ma, I don't know what to say." Madame Ifeoma winked. "Don't thank me, just promise to help others too." Zara smiled, her heart full. "I will." With that, one signature changed everything. The girl who had once been homeless became the CEO of the company. A year later, Zara sat in the office that had once belonged to Madame Ifeoma. She looked at the young girl standing nervously before her. The girl's clothes were clean, but old. She reminded Zara of herself. "What's your name?" Zara asked gently. "Nia Ma," the girl whispered. Zara glanced at Nia's CV. It was nearly empty. No experience, no degrees. "Why should I hire you?" Zara asked, raising an eyebrow. Nia took a deep breath. "I'll work really hard, Ma. Just give me a chance." Zara leaned back, smiling. "You're hired." Nia's eyes widened. "Really?" Zara nodded. "Someone once gave me a chance. It's time I did the same." Nia covered her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. "Thank you, Ma. Thank you." As Zara watched the girl wipe away her tears, she knew she had done the right thing. The cycle of kindness had to continue.